So I just finished Spare, Prince Harry's memoir, and wow.
The Duke of Sussex, more commonly known as Prince Harry, he's been a subject of global fascination and intense media scrutiny. But after years of watching others tell his life story, he says that it was time for him to finally take control of the narrative.
So just a quick side note, in this video I'm going to be sharing clips of Prince Harry doing interviews because Harry has expressed multiple times in his book and in interviews how important it was for him to be able to be the source of his story, to have the words coming from his mouth and being heard from him in his book. So I want to stay true to that and share as many clips from interviews where he's saying the words as absolutely possible. So just noting that, because that's important to him and I want to respect that. Perhaps since I've started writing my own memoir, I'm very interested in memoirs of all kinds and I've been reading a bunch of them over the last few years. So I'm going to start sharing more of those with you, starting with Spare.
It must be on a certain level kind of nerve-wracking to be out there to publicly and physically represent the book. Would you like a cocktail before we begin?
Yes, please.
I hear you like tequila.
Yeah, let's go.
Tequila, let's do this.
This memoir in particular surprised me. I'm not sure what I was expecting, to be honest, but it wasn't what I read. Maybe I was expecting an account of the life of a prince or an expose on his family and what it's really like being a royal, but that's not what I got. I think the introduction Stephen Colbert gave Harry on his late night show, I'm gonna call him Harry because that's what he said to call him, was the most accurate thing. Harry, a husband, a father, a military veteran, and an activist with 2 kids, 3 dogs, living out his life in Southern California. He just also happens to be the Duke of Sussex. But I think that's the most realistic way to introduce him because throughout his book I found a lot of things to be really relatable and I often forgot that I was reading a book written by Prince Harry. His stories were just so relatable, things that lots of us have dealt with, like worrying about being married by 30, having arguments with your brother, being nervous about finding the right one and starting a family and will she like me too. They were just all so relatable that I totally forgot until we got to a sentence where he said, and then my grandmother, the Queen of England. And I was like, oh yeah, that's who you are. I listened to all 15 hours of Spare on Audible over just a few days, and I highly suggest it. The audiobook is great, and I always love it when authors of audiobooks actually narrate their own memoirs, just memoirs. With fiction, I'm like, yeah, go hire somebody. But with memoirs, I think it adds a whole new level of intimacy. Spare ended up being, of course, an account of Harry's life as a royal because that's who he was, who he grew up as. But overall, it was a critical account of the British press and how they have run rampant and how what they do hurts people in ways that a lot of people don't even think about. In fact, the series of leaks, of press leaks, of pieces of Harry's book that came out beforehand, before its release, and all of the crazy accusations and misconceptions that came with it completely narrates and actually, funnily enough, backs up exactly what Harry says in his book about the press.
Writing this book has been a cathartic experience for me. Hard times and happy times, bringing up old memories that I didn't think I had. But yes, context is everything, and unfortunately, due to those leaks, the British press, which are central to so much of my story in my 38 years up until this point, and after spending 2 years focused on context, what I'm going to share, how I'm going to share it, and being able to piece it all together, they intentionally chose to strip away all the context and take out individual segments of my life, my story, and every experience that I've had and turn it into a salacious headline.
Well, I mean, there are
Which
problems with
is somewhat typical.
Right, especially if you read this book, you find out how typical that is.
Yes.
Now, there's a lot of faults in the American press, and people from all different stripes can see that in the American press, but the British press is almost odd to me. It's sort of bizarre how vicious they can be.
So I didn't know a lot of things about Prince Harry before reading this book. I'm not a big royal watcher, and I never really followed the UK royals closely, but I was surprised by a lot of things, including how horribly the press treated Harry.
I think one of the most look, I'm not going to lie, the last few days have been hurtful and challenging, not being able to do anything about those leaks that you referred to. But perhaps not perhaps, without doubt, the most dangerous lie that they have told is that I somehow boasted about the number of people that I killed in Afghanistan.
I've read that section of the book, and without reading the entire thing right here, to me, it's a very thoughtful description of what that knowledge is like to have and what the experience is to know that you have done this in order to protect what you believe is good in the world from those who would wish to destroy it. There's nothing boastful about it. And not only that...
But also, I would say that if I heard anybody else, if I heard anyone boasting about that kind of thing, I would be angry. But it's a lie. And hopefully, now that the book is out, people will be able to see the context. And it's really troubling and very disturbing that they can get away with it.
And also
because they had the context. It wasn't like here's just one line. They had the whole section. They ripped it away and just said, here it is. He's boasting on this.
I was also shocked when I found out where the name Spare came from, which you learned in the first couple chapters, but I could not believe that was a real thing. And I know I'm laughing, but it's just so... It seems ridiculous to me. I had no idea that that's the way things are.
The air spare is probably something very new, but it is literally that. You have the air, and then you have the spare. You have the distraction. And if you're not careful, you can really play into that, like some members of my family have. And I fell for that trap when I was, in my teenage years, looking for my purpose and trying to work out what was going on.
So before I mentioned things were relatable in the book, one of the big ones being his experience with PTSD, trauma, and therapy.
How do you see that wall now that you've been through self-reflection and some therapy about that? Have you been able to see over it in some ways?
No, I've definitely been able to see over it. I would say that I haven't necessarily kicked it down, but I've managed to reach to the top and start removing bricks as opposed to poking one through and having a look and poking another one through. The wall has reduced in size. That is partly through writing a book, partly through therapy and having her scent, her perfume, and spraying it and being able to unlock memories that I never thought I had. But there are memories pre-12-year-old Harry that I will never be able to access. And that sucks. That's really sad. But again, I imagine it is so relatable for so many people because as far as I'm concerned, with all the work that I've done on myself, but also the stories that I've heard from so many people, not just veterans, that I'm convinced that 99.9% of people on planet Earth are walking around with some form of unresolved grief, trauma, or loss. And with that comes these filters, of which acts as a fog. And every opportunity we have to be able to clean the windscreen, take the filters away, and actually see life as it is and be able to live a truly authentic life, that, to me, has been the freedom that I didn't even know that I was looking for most of my life.
I think those things are things that a lot of people can relate to, including myself. And I think it's always important to talk about mental health. So I really commend him for sharing his experience so intimately with, the world. The book isn't all seriousness. There are many lighthearted stories in between the heavy ones, like his first trip to Botswana and lovely moments with his grandmother as a grandmother rather than as the Queen of England. You also get to hear the beautiful love story of him and Meghan and how they got married, and yes, there are some hard things sprinkled in there, but it's beautiful to hear their love story, including how they had their children. There's also a very funny story that I won't recount here about how Prince Harry got frostbite on his South Pole while he was visiting the South Pole. You can read more about that one in the book.
You write a lot about your brother. You write about him with love. You call him Willie. But there is a different Willie that also gave you some pain and trouble. You got frostbite.
Frostnip?
Frostnip? Frostnip on a delicate part of your anatomy. And you write about this in the book when you went to the North Pole.
Now they're interested.
Okay. Can you explain how it is that the Royal Standard got frostnip? Walk us through it. Take all the time in the world.
How long have you... Can I have a drink?
Sure, there you go, yes.
How long have you been waiting to ask that question?
Since I read the book yesterday.
We've taken quite a leap from grief and trauma to my Todger.
So there are takeaways from every good memoir. And I think some of the biggest takeaways from this one is for the public to think twice about how and when we choose to consume media, because it matters. Something I specifically have become really disciplined about, especially after reading this book, is not drawing conclusions or assumptions about people I've never met, especially public figures. Harry shares a good example in his interview of how a lot of us can become addicted to social media and how that can really be damaging because it encourages more of the same.
Well, there wouldn't be those photos if the public didn't go buy those magazines. Do you have a conflicted feeling about how the audience for that kind of salacious work that gets sold aid and abets it?
Yeah. I think so many of us feed into it. A lot of us feed into it without realizing it. We click on photographs without really considering how that photograph was taken and the story behind that photograph, especially with someone's kids. So yeah, I mean, look, the way that I look at it now, and again, I talk about it in the book, I was obsessed. I was specifically looking for stories about my wife so that I could educate myself on the opinions that were happening and things that were being said so that I could try to fix it, right? But I think, now for me, I've weaned myself off that because I was slightly addicted to it. And now I have a digital diet. And as much as I worry about what I put in my mouth, I worry about what I put through my eyes as well. And my life is so much better for it.
An even bigger takeaway from me personally is how a memoir can not only be used to tell your own personal story, but also be used to bring attention to bigger issues that can impact change in the way people think and then in the world. Harry's telling a story about himself, about how he grew up, stories along his life, but he's also telling the tales about how a really big problem in the UK is the media and how that needs to change because it's literally hurting people. Overall, this is a beautifully written book. I would have enjoyed it if anyone had written it because it's really, really beautifully done. I think this one will become one of the memoirs that I reread every few years, like Drew Barrymore's and Matthew McConaughey's and a couple others. It was a long book, 15 hours, and I was listening to it pretty religiously, but I never found a point where I felt like the story dragged. I never found a point where I got bored, which is really hard to do. And especially in a 15-hour book, it can start to feel like, okay, we get it, on to the next thing, but I never felt that way the entire time. He also has a really beautiful way of telling stories. The way he describes all of the detail of the places he was when things were happening is really cool and really makes you feel like you're in the moment, even though he doesn't remember every single detail. Which is encouraging for me because as I'm writing my memoir, yeah, I don't remember every single detail, but if I can make mine half as beautiful as his and make the stories half as engaging, I think I'll be fine. Aside from the beautiful writing, I think this was a really brave thing for him to do. To speak out so candidly about some of the conflicts he's had with his family, some of the really big conflicts that he's had with the media, and also the issues that he's had with his own mental health and his own family, with the royal family, but in his family with him and Meghan, and his experience going to therapy. I think all of these things are really intimate things to share, and the greater issues around the media and his family are really brave to share because those are real relationships that he is putting a strain on by sharing with us. Talking about these things in such a frank way, not being afraid to hurt people's feelings, is really brave, and I think that there's something we can all take away from that, especially those of us who are trying to write our own memoirs. Anyway, thanks for watching this video. Go read Spare. It's awesome. It's a really good book. You won't regret it. I highly suggest you listen to it on Audible because it just gives a whole new level to the book, and the way he speaks, you get the sense that he's being honest and being truthful, and I think that that's a really cool side to the whole story. Like and subscribe, hit the bell so you get notified when I post new videos. If you've read the book, comment what you think about the book. No hate comments though. I am aware that by making this video, I'm kind of opening myself up to that. So don't make me block you. And I will see you in the next video. Bye.
Again, one of the reasons why I wrote this book is every word in that book is mine. And I realize that especially...
What do you mean by that?
Because the amount of unnamed sources that have fed information to the British tabloids about me and my wife and my family...
You have a source
true
and it's you.
and not true. I am the source of that book. And the difference is that instead of hiding behind, unnamed sources, these are my words from my lips, from my mouth. And I understand, especially for British people, that it can be incredibly jarring to have my name to a lot of these stories. It is also quite bizarre because a lot of these stories in this book have actually been told already.